Hello, and welcome to episode 32 of the Sci-Fi Podcast. From Bloomington, Indiana, I'm Nick Zautro. I hope all of our listeners had a very pleasant holiday, and I wish you all a very happy new year. Today on the podcast, I am pleased to welcome Dr. Tim Maudlin, professor of philosophy at New York University. Tim is an American philosopher of science who has mainly studied the foundations of physics, metaphysics, and logic. In Tim's first book, Quantum Non-Locality and Relativity, Tim explains Bell's theorem and the tension between violations of Bell's inequality and relativity. In his book, Truth and Paradox, Solving the Riddles, Tim presents a new resolution to the liar paradox and other semantic paradoxes that requires a modification of classical logic. In his book, The Metaphysics Within Physics, the central idea is that metaphysics, insofar as it is concerned with the natural world, can do no better than to reflect on physics. Tim's present major project is New Foundations for Physical Geometry, which develops a new mathematical analysis of the geometrical properties of spaces, which are usually discussed in topology. The main difference is that whereas standard topology analyzes the geometry of a space in terms of its open sets, Tim's theory analyzes it in terms of the continuous lines in the space. Thus, without further ado, let's bring in Tim. Dr. Tim Maudlin, welcome to the Sci-Fi Podcast. How are you this winter morning?
I'm keeping warm, fortunately.
Keeping warm. So so how are things? Are you currently in New York, in New York City?
Yes, I am. I'm sitting here overlooking Washington Square Park as we speak.
Wow. Oh, great. So keeping warm, is it in the negatives over there?
No, it's not that bad, but down in the teens is quite enough to make it uncomfortable for us.
I completely understand. How was your holiday so far?
Oh, it's been very pleasant. Went down to see my family in Washington, and
oh, nice.
And went to the New Year's concert with Vienna, an orchestra from Vienna that does the sort of standard New Year's Vienna waltz thing, and that was fun.
Oh, cool. Was this in D.C., you said? Or
No, that was here in
Washington Square Park. I'm sorry. Oh, nice. Very nice. Did you avoid the big crowds of the New Year's, or were you immersed in them as well?
No, we were just at a small party, so we weren't
nice.
Anywhere near. I would not be out on that night. I mean, it was really cold on New Year's.
Right. Okay. Well, for our listeners who don't know, Tim is a professor of philosophy at New York University, philosopher of science. How long have you been teaching at NYU?
This is my 7th year.
Great.
Yeah,
great.
I was at Rutgers before then.
Okay.
For a quarter of a century.
A quarter of a century. Okay. So, all right. Well,
yeah.
Great. And how have things been going in New York so far?
Fine. It's a good area to be doing philosophy of physics.
Yep.
There's a nice group of people that are scattered around through various institutions here. Good.
Well, I'm excited to get to see where you are presently and kind of the lay of the land there. But let's take a step back, and I'd like to know, Tim, where did you grow up?
In Washington D.C.
Okay. Where? Right on Capitol Hill, where it was a suburb? Where in D.C.?
No, in the city itself.
Okay.
If anybody who knows the city out in Northwest, so very pleasant.
Very nice. What was it like back then? So you were born in 58. What was it like the 60s in D.C. area?
Well, there were obviously lots of things going on downtown a lot during the war. The only thing that that was very noticeable when I was a child was when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and then there was really serious worries about rioting, and you saw some, police or military, I guess they were reserve units or something, called up. So in day-to-day life, it was fine. There was a lot of talk about politics, and if you wanted to get involved in demonstrations, it was easy enough to get down and go to demonstrations on the mall. Wow.
And so what were your parents up to at the time? What did mom and dad do?
My mother was a teacher, really a sort of teacher's aide in the public schools, and my father worked as a little hard to describe what he did, but basically he was a person who companies that did not have any representation in Washington, he would keep eye on legislation that might affect them. So he wasn't a lobbyist. He was just sort of the eyes and ears of smaller companies that
being aware,
needed someone to know that something might be coming down the pike that would affect them.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So that is interesting to describe what he did. Not exactly a lobbyist, but
I don't think he tried to influence anything. He was just, the person on the ground who could keep track of things.
Very, very nice, very nice. And did you enjoy growing up in the DC area?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I had a very nice childhood. Very pleasant.
Very nice, very nice. What kinds of things were you interested in?
As a kid, sort of normal kid things, I guess, and nothing really jumps out at me as in school I liked kind of everything. I liked math a lot at a younger age, but I sort of was dabbling in everything there was. I wasn't much of a sports fan or things like that, but other than that, I had a pretty broad range of interests.
Okay. So what was it about math, would you say, that kind of was particularly of interest to you?
I think it's the sort of puzzle-solving aspect to it. I always like to do logic puzzles. I like to do things where there's a solution and there are more or less elegant ways to get there, and there's a satisfaction in working out what the answer is, and an extra satisfaction if you do it in a clever way.
Sure. And so, growing up, Tim, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, sorry. I think we might have.
I'm sorry. I thought it. I thought I'd finished this paragraph.
Oh no! I think I heard a beep, so I just wanted to ask.
No, it wasn't on my end. I didn't hear a beep. Sure.
So, growing up, in terms of your education, what were, was mathematics? Was studying in school? Was this something that was encouraged by your parents?
They didn't have to. I was just one of those kids who actually liked school.
Yeah. Okay.
I liked doing the stuff, and aside from one or two classes along the way where I didn't get along with the teacher and lost interest for that reason, I just sort of enjoyed it. So, and I was around. Fortunately, later in my education, I was with a group of kids in my class. There were kind of a critical mass of kids who were all sort of little semi-intellectuals, and we liked to learn things and talk to each other and consider ourselves to be refined in certain ways.
Really?
So it was nice to have a clique like that.
That's great. At what point was this? Was this in high school? Was this in
probably, starting in seventh grade up through high school.
Oh, okay. And what kinds of issues would you discuss, or
there were some of us who we get season tickets to the National Symphony and go listen to the music and read various political things and philosophical things, and kind of all around interest in what seemed to be
sort of like a self-organized group of refined individuals who are trying to pursue intellectual activities and things.
Yeah.
Cool. Very nice. So at what point did philosophy come on, or I should say philosophy or physics come into your worldview?
Well, physics, when I started taking physics, which I liked it just because it was, of all the sciences, seemed to be the cleanest in terms of exactly what you were doing, as opposed to biology or even chemistry, which wasn't quite as precise. And philosophy, it turned out in my high school there was a senior seminar in philosophy, so that was my first official exposure to philosophical texts, and it was the kind of thing that I just very immediately just enjoyed.
Okay, yeah. So, what do you recall? Any of the texts that you read, or like any of the thoughts that you had at the time?
Sure. I mean, I could probably name more than you'd be interested in. I guess one that sticks out in my mind was reading Pascal's Wager, which was just because I then wrote a paper about why it didn't work. So it was one of those things where you have a formally presented argument and you can sort of isolate the flaw in it and explicate what went wrong with it, and that's 90% of my job now. So.
Yeah, great. Okay, and so but at the time, so being introduced to both physics and philosophy, was there was there a particular discipline that you were more drawn to? Like, in a sense, what was there something that you felt, I want to be a philosopher, I want to be a physicist?
I mean, in high school, when I applied to college, I was going to become an architect. Actually, that was my plan.
Okay.
Even more specifically, I was going to get an undergraduate degree in civil engineering and then go on to graduate school in architecture.
Right.
So that was my original plan, but that just, I got directed off in other directions.
Sure. What happened? So tell me about that. How was this a long-standing interest of yours in architecture, or how did you?
Yeah. I had done a internship at an architectural firm, and I was interested in architecture generally, and was into Buckminster Fuller and geodesic domes and things like that. And my parents, the house I grew up in was a sort of contemporary designed house. And if you grow up in a house that's very unlike most houses, you become pretty sensitive to what's peculiar about the way most houses are laid out.
What was peculiar about your home?
It was very open design. It was very, the living room and the dining room and the kitchen all flowed into each other, and it was very bright and big windows, and so a lot of the houses you went in seemed sort of claustrophobic and chopped up in various ways. More or less, when we bought our house, we basically went in and tore out all the walls.
So what kinds of structures did you at first want to? Did you have an idea of what you wanted to design or?
Well, it was a combination of things. I mean, aesthetically, I sort of inherited a great admiration for Frank Lloyd Wright, which my father had, and then you can combine that with some of the stuff that Buckminster Fuller was talking about, basically using design to intentionally create lifestyles and so on, and it seemed sort of rational thing to do.
Very nice. Okay, so let's start with your foray into your undergraduate career. So you began as an architectural major or architect?
Well, I never actually declared I mean, I went in intending to do an undergraduate degree, as I said, in civil engineering, and took the introductory civil engineering course, which was just quite honestly rather boring. If you need a cow barn to be built, I can, I could at the time tell you where to put the rebars and how many rebars to put in. But it was just not intellectually very stimulating.
Sure.
And at the same time, I was doing a kind of intensive survey of Western civilization, which was really interesting, really engaging, and had interesting kids in it. So that started to pull me away in other directions.
Sure. So, and where were you studying during your undergrad? Just at Yale?
I was at Yale.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. So you said you were a history. Was it a history course, or was it more of a humanities course?
There was a special program called Directed Studies, which had and still has something of a reputation as being a kind of boot camp for people who want to become familiar with Western civilization. So it was a combination of courses, one in literature, one in philosophy, and one in, what was the third one in? I can't even remember. History, I guess. Yeah.
Sure.
And you did the Western canon and very intensively and so on.
Very nice. Very nice. So, so being pulled away from the engineering programs, what was drawing you closer? Was this philosophy or?
Largely philosophy, and at the same time, I was doing physics, and I was interested in physics, but I ended up doing a joint degree in physics and philosophy.
Oh, nice! Is that something you invented yourself, or?
No, they had it. They had it available. I mean, I did basically everything you would do for a philosophy major and everything you would do for a physics major, except for some of the lab work, because I was just dreadful at laboratories and didn't like them. So this was a way to avoid the requirements for all the labs.
This is a common notion of philosophers of science being not particularly fond of the lab work. What was it about the lab work that was challenging or difficult?
I was just crummy at it. I mean, doing the lab reports was basically an exercise in making up excuses for why the thing didn't come out the way it should. Yeah. I would get numbers and then I'd go and try and analyze them, and they didn't correspond to what was predicted, and you sort of say, well, maybe this apparatus was broken, or I don't know what happened. It was just, it was more like legal reasoning, trying to excuse something. I don't know.
Excuse why the experiment didn't work or why your process wasn't sufficient. Sure. Okay. You kept, okay. So, continuing on at Yale, did you do a thesis project or something?
No thesis, just a regular major.
Okay. So, as you're going through, was doing philosophy or physics full time of interest to you, or was this just something you're interested in studying and you had other career ideas?
I guess I figured I would go on in philosophy at some point. I can't exactly pinpoint when and actually, even at the end, I thought I might switch back to architecture.
Sure.
It occurred to me, but it was, pretty clear that I was, I enjoyed doing philosophy and I had a sort of knack for it. So, and more of a knack than for physics, where my math wasn't up to speed for doing really, really advanced physics.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, what was next? Was going into philosophy, graduate program philosophy? Well,
I really knew nothing about professional philosophy, as it were, or very much about contemporary philosophy. Almost all the philosophy I read was historical. So I went to my professors, a couple of my professors, to ask for advice. And the first one, Bob Fogelin, gave me the following advice. He said, not even if you were Immanuel Kant would I suggest you go to graduate school in philosophy. So that was his advice. Fortunately, the second one I went to, who was Ruth Marcus, I told her about what Fogelin said, and she said, yeah, I know what he's talking about, but there are the lucky few, she said. And I still remember that's exactly the words she used. So she encouraged me to apply, but I still didn't know where to apply. And
sure.
Nancy Mall, who had been my teacher in philosophy of science, suggested that I apply actually to the History and Philosophy of Science program at Pitt. And so I applied there, and I applied to some other graduate schools in straight philosophy, and it just turned out that the offer from Pitt was the most reasonable one to take, so that's where I went.
So before we get into the Pitt, so what was behind the strong recommendation against the straight philosophy PhD program?
He said there are no jobs, there will not be any jobs for the foreseeable future. I mean, I think he was someone who was on the faculty, had graduate students who he thought were very good and were unable to get employment. And his suggestion was to go to law school, which actually I applied to law school and got into law school and deferred it for a couple of years, thinking that if the other graduate school didn't work out, I could just fall back and get a law degree.
Sure.
So that was my backup plan at that point. But it was just purely practical considerations, he said. It's very hard nowadays to actively encourage anybody to go into philosophy, because you see people who are very good, and after 6 years, they can't get a job. I mean, to be honest about it, you have to say to anybody, if you're going to do graduate work in philosophy, you should be prepared. You should be in a state of mind where if you do it for 6 years and then you have to go do something else, you're still glad you did it. And if you're not in that state of mind, you just shouldn't do it, because it's going to, it'll tear you apart, because it's too uncertain what the future will be.
I think that's really good advice. That's really good. So you ended up accepting the offer at Pitt. How was so this brought you into history and philosophy of science? How was your time there?
Oh, that was great. I mean, it was an interesting department. You had a mix of people who had philosophy backgrounds and people who had science backgrounds, and it had this kind of focus to it on philosophy of science. And you also had all the resources from the philosophy department right there. So,
how did you get? So, as working as in the HPS department, did you find yourself interacting a lot with the philosophers over in philosophy, or?
Yeah. I mean, when I first went there, the departments were actually physically apart from each other, but in the time I was there, they both moved, so they were literally across the hall. And so I took quite a lot of philosophy courses of all kinds, in addition to the HPS courses.
Cool. And so, while in graduate school, what kinds of projects were you interested in and or working on?
I can't say I came with a project in mind. It was much less, professionalized than it is now. I mean, you get these graduate people applying to graduate school now who really do have projects that they're planning to pursue. I mean, I was just there taking classes and learning stuff and, bouncing around from this to that. I had no large-scale plan in mind at all.
Okay, well, what were you bouncing around in? Like, what kinds of things were you exploring?
So there was all the sort of history of philosophy and standard background in philosophy of science that I needed for my program. I did a lot of ancient philosophy, as a matter of fact. I had learned Greek, and some of my first published work was analysis of Aristotle. So I did a fair amount of ancient philosophy, and then beyond that, pretty much everything that was out there. I mean, I took classes in Habermas and classes with Sellers and Kant and ethics, and I just was kind of omnivorous about the thing.
Very nice. So did you end up doing some more history while you were there?
Well, history of science. I mean, not anything.
Or that's what I mean. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, sure. You had to. I mean, it was, half of my classes in HPS were basically history classes.
Right.
But, you would be reading Galileo, or you'd be going through Newton's optics, or, you'd be doing actual historical science and trying to understand really what was going on at the time, what the conceptual systems were and how the arguments went.
Sure. So how did you come to find your ultimately land on your dissertation project?
By chance. It was more or less a coincidental thing that happened. I mean, my dissertation was actually on natural kind terms. It was something that I've never even published about. I've not taken a word out of that dissertation and done anything with it. And I just happened to be reading Kripke and Putnam and Locke and Aristotle's Posterior Analytics and Lakatos's Proofs and Refutations, more or less at the same time because of different classes. And all of them kind of interacted with each other in a certain way, which gave me a dissertation.
That's really interesting to hear. So, was there a reason you never ended up doing anything with this work, or did you quickly kind of fall into other projects that kind of let this go by the wayside?
I mean, basically what happened was nobody on my dissertation committee was particularly in this field, and I wasn't either. It was only after I finished the dissertation and went out that I was sort of made aware that there was a whole big, huge literature on this that I'd never even read.
Sure.
And so, it was. I think the dissertation is fine. I mean, I'd still defend it now, but first of all, there wasn't so much this, unbelievable publish or perish pressure. So I didn't think in any concrete terms that I had to, and it was clear, and it was a more or less real thesis rather than a bunch of separate papers, which now people do that can easily be chopped up into papers. So it just would have taken some work to carve out parts and make them into separate papers. And I just moved on to other topics that I was interested in.
Yeah. No, completely understandable. So after graduate school, what was next? Did you immediately find some work, or?
Yeah, I did get a job.
How was that?
Not that it was easy. No, it was very tough.
Yeah, tell me a little bit.
It was a very tough year. It was 1986, and I put out a lot of applications, and I actually got quite a lot of interviews. But I don't think I had learned at the time, or even thought about how to present myself to a philosophy department.
Sure.
Anyway, what came out of all that were only two offers. One was at the St. John's Great Books program, which would have been a extremely different kind of career if I'd done that.
Sure.
So it had its attractions. And the other one was at Rutgers. So I went to Rutgers.
Good. Well, it's good to hear that the job search worked out. So coming into, well, I should actually, before that, how do you think the job search back then has changed to then what it is like now?
Look, it's night and day from what it was. I mean, the fact is, when I was in graduate school, nobody was particularly obsessed about getting a job. There was nobody who thought they had to have there were a couple people who seemed to be intent on publishing as graduate student, which seemed positively strange at the time, and that you were somehow way too over ambitious if you thought you had to do that. And now, it's just honestly something you have to think about and do to have a chance on the market. I just don't remember people being particularly stressed out about it. It was a good program.
Yep.
And you figured if you came out of a good program, you'd get a job somewhere. As far as I remember, people mostly did. I mean, it's not that anybody ended up really with nothing.
Yeah.
And those were considered to be hard times.
Right. Well, this was prior to being even
has gotten so much worse.
Prior to even being recommended by former undergraduate advisors. Look, don't even don't consider it. But there is something to be said, like being in a good program, having a good pedigree, definitely can. I mean, it's sort of, you're getting really good training, and so hopefully people will, attest to that. This is someone, you're someone that departments should consider to hire.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, despite the the realities of the job searches now, let's go back to your time at Rutgers. What was it like just starting out as an assistant professor?
It was very. I mean, they gave me a kind of special fellowship, which reduced my teaching load for the first 3 years. So that was nice, and I was just very lucky with the colleagues. I had Bob Weingart, who was a specialist in philosophy of physics, and not every department has one, and so we got on tremendously, and I learned a lot from him. So that was lucky. And otherwise, the department was fine. It was at the time when Rutgers was just building up. It was before it had hired Fodor and Stitch and sort of really moved up, but they had gotten resources that made things possible, and so there was a lot of activity in the department for hiring people, and I ran into almost accidentally Shelley Goldstein, who's in the math department, who's a mathematical physicist, and he's been the most important person in my life probably since then. So that was lucky for me.
Yeah, tell me about that. How has this interaction influenced your work and, as you said, your life?
Well, look, Shelley's just one of the best people in the world on foundations of physics, and he's also a tremendously good philosopher. I mean, he knows a lot of philosophy, and he's intrinsically a very good philosopher, and he's an excellent physicist and on foundational issues, and so you hang around him, you learn a lot. That's all there is to it.
Sounds good, yeah. And so so as you're doing your work, I mean, so it sounds like you were interacting with those not just in the philosophy department, but in mathematics, in physics?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Not so much in physics. I mean, it's, again, one of those odd things that you're more likely to run into people doing foundations and interested in foundations of physics in math departments and in philosophy departments and in physics departments. It's something that's kind of positively discouraged in physics departments to work on foundations. So I did interact with some of the people in physics occasionally from time to time, and but there was not anyone there whose main focus was on foundational issues. Right.
So I imagine some of your early work at Rutgers, was this leading to your first book, Quantum Non-Locality and Relativity?
Yeah, I mean, I was tremendously bowled over by Bell's theorem when I first read about it, which was in my senior year as an undergraduate, in this paper on it that Bernard Despaignat had in the Scientific American. My roommates still, remembered they were coming back and saw me through the window pacing around and around and around reading this magazine. And it was reading Despaignat's article, and it just, completely blew me away. But when I was in graduate school, there was really nobody working on foundations of quantum mechanics. Clark Gleamore had done work on relativity, on general relativity. In my last year there, John Ehrman came, and he was working on, also his work was on space-time, and he had just done the manuscript for his book on determinism. But he was not focused on quantum. So there wasn't a lot of discussion of foundations of quantum mechanics. But once I got to Rutgers and started talking to Shelley and started talking to Bob Weingart, they both had been thinking a lot about foundations of quantum mechanics, so I was able to pick that up again.
Okay. So if you wouldn't mind, for more of a general audience, what can what are some of the main ideas of the book, and some of the main ideas in which it's responding to?
Well, what Bell proved was that in general, any theory at all, that is able to make a certain kind of predictions about experiments that are done very far from each other, as we would say now, it's space-like separation, that is so far from each other that even light couldn't connect them. So you couldn't message or have causal connections that went at the speed of light. that if there was no physical connection, as it were, or physical influence between these systems, then there are limitations to the kinds of results you could get out of your experiments, limitations to the kind of statistical results that you would see. And so this is what's called Bell's inequality, and basically what Bell proved is that any local theory will satisfy this inequality. Now, the amazing thing was that quantum mechanics the predictions of quantum mechanics don't satisfy the inequality. Yeah. And so quantum mechanics makes predictions that no local theory can make. And then when they went to test and see if the quantum mechanical predictions were correct, they turned out to be. So there's a long period of doing better and better experimental work, verifying the predictions, which have always come out in favor of quantum mechanics, and therefore against the idea of locality, that there's some non-locality in the world, and that's why the book was called Quantum Non-Locality and Relativity. The question is, can you reconcile this non-locality with the theory of relativity? What are the tensions there, and what are the prospects for reconciling them?
Okay. And how was the book received?
It was well received. I think it was the first, book-length attempt to sort out just conceptually different questions you could be asking.
Yeah.
It came about a bit also accidentally because Bell himself was coming to Rutgers and to give a talk, and I was supposed to give a little introductory talk beforehand. And originally I thought that there are different ways of understanding what follows from the theory of relativity. And I would just two different ways, and I thought I'll make this distinction, and then I thought no, there are three different ways, and then I thought no, there are four, and then five, and so I just had five different things you could articulate as what you might think the theory of relativity says can't go faster than light, and then which of these, if any, you need to violate in order to get violations of Bell's inequality, and that gave me the structure of the book.
Oh, very nice. And so did you have a lot of interactions with Bell?
I discussed things with him a couple times directly, and I guess heard him, let me see, 1, 2, 3 times. I guess every time I heard him speak, no, I take that back. I heard him speak 4 times. Sorry, I have to recall. I heard him speak directly 4 times, and I guess 3 of those 4 times I interacted with him at least a little bit and went to talk to him. Not terribly extensively, but did actually go discuss with him a few things.
Very nice, very nice. Okay, so I see here we have a few more books that I'm curious to discuss a little bit. And if there's any other papers or anything you'd like to mention that are some of your favorites, I'd be glad to hear of them. So the next book, in Truth and Paradox: Solving the Riddles. So tell me a little bit, a pretty different kind of book from your first book. I mean, completely. Is this more in philosophy of language or philosophy of logic?
Logic.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me.
Yeah, that book was written by accident, actually.
I love how you work by accident. I love this because I think this is so true to how people actually do things.
Yeah, I mean, it's you've got to be very opportunistic and just see where you're taken. It's very hard, and this is why it's hard for me to give advice to graduate students about their dissertations, because it's very hard in philosophy to come up with a topic that you both know that if you put some hard work into it, you'll make some progress and that you'll get some interesting results on an interesting topic. There are other fields where it's easier to do that. You say, we know that this needs to be worked out, or we know that this needs to be, this experiment needs to be done. Right. And if you put the time in, you'll get somewhere. And in philosophy, it's much more opportunistic to see where you get an idea that looks like it's new and it might go somewhere. Anyway, that book arose because actually I had written a criticism, a review of one of Roger Penrose's books, and a criticism of his use of Gödel's theorem. And it always occurred to me that the way Gödel's theorem was being used in his arguments was suspiciously close to the liar paradox. And then it occurred to me that, well, there is this interesting thing about the liar paradox, which is that when you state the reasoning seems perfectly good, but it leads you to contradictory conclusions, right? And if you shift from the liar's paradox to what's called Curry's paradox or Loeb's paradox, it's even more striking that you have a chain of reasoning that step by step looks absolutely fine, but isn't because you can prove anything. And so my original thought was, well, I should just first work out what goes wrong in the case of the liar paradox, and then see if the same thing is going wrong with Penrose's reasoning about Gödel. And, I sort of thought working out what was wrong with the reasoning in the liar paradox would be a weekend. But that turned out to be a book, right? Because it's not a question that, quite honestly, most of the literature, the philosophical literature on the topic is focused on. They're just focused elsewhere. And so you if you start asking yourself how to amend just straightforward, syntactically specified logical inferences to avoid this bad conclusion, it's not at all obvious where things need to be fixed and how they need to be fixed. And I went through iteration after iteration of thinking I'd figured it out and then working for a while and then realizing my solution didn't work or it was getting more and more complicated. And I kept going from one idea to another and then finally hit on the one that made sense and everything fell together. And then by then it was book length. So that's how that happened.
Wow. So something that you thought, this could be solved right away. Or not solved, but at least I could say something meaningful over a weekend or something, or in a small amount of time, and I realized it was much more complicated or, and it was a puzzle that took much longer than you thought.
Yeah. And there's a reason for that. I mean, there's just it's a funny thing. What happens is, what everybody knows, if you just take standard first order logic and add to it the Tarski T sentences, or these very simple inferences, like to infer from snow is white that the sentence, quote, snow is white is true, and the other direction to infer from the fact that the sentence, quote, snow is white is true, to infer that snow is white. If you just add those inferences to standard logic, you get this disaster. It turns out you can prove anything. So the entire system collapses. And the original thought was, well, we know that standard logic all on its own is okay. Yeah. And you add this other piece to it, so the problem must be somewhere in that other piece. But that's just bad reasoning, because the inferences that you add all by themselves are also perfectly okay. They don't get you into any trouble. So you can't say that just because when I combined A and B and get trouble, and A all by itself had no trouble, that the problem lies in A. Because B by itself, there's no trouble either. And it turns out, I think, that everybody's just been misled by this to focus in the wrong place, and that really the problem was with what we teach is standard logic, and that's where the correction had to come.
So you offered this was the resolution to that, was criticizing the problems with standard logic. Great.
Yep.
Very nice. And how was this received?
Well, this was received not nearly so well. For the same issue that came up after my dissertation, namely, there's a tremendous literature on this.
Sure.
And I did not cite most of it, and quite honestly, I wasn't even terribly familiar with most of it. I mean, I read what I thought to be the classic statements of basic strategies.
Right.
And once I knew that my strategy was different from those strategies, I didn't much care to read all the rest of the literature on that strategy, because I just knew I was doing something different. But the people who do this for a living I think were not very happy that I could write a book and basically cite so little of the literature. And you understand that, although
Yep.
I don't think that there was anything out there that had a bearing on what I was doing that I missed. But I certainly didn't give a lot of place in my exposition to the various things that had been tried and so on, once I realized they were different from what I was doing.
Yeah, it's too bad there's not a way to say, look, I could contextualize myself in all these things. However, I'm pretty sure this is you kind of said yourself, look, I'm pretty sure this is not, I'm doing something different here. But there is this kind of value in philosophical writing, in kind of writing to situate yourself. But
yeah, I mean, the problem I have is that if I read too much literature, I do that too much and the writing falls apart. I have a line of thought. I basically have an idea I'm trying to articulate and clarify. And if I read too much, then every time I say something, I then have to add a paragraph about why this is a bit different from what so-and-so said and a bit different from what this person's doing. And I sort of feel obligated to do that, but then it makes reading the thing just a mess because you're constantly being deflected from the main line of thought into all of these tangents. So basically what I've decided to do, because this is just the way I can work, is work out my ideas as my ideas. And when I'm done, go and check and make sure nobody has articulated the same idea, which if they have, then, tough luck for me. I won't publish the thing, but I will have at least learned it. I mean, you understand things much better when you do them yourself, even if somebody else has already done it, right? You comprehend it better working it out for yourself. So I just made the decision to do that, and then if it turns out to be something new, I get it published. If it's not, then I put it in the drawer, but I'm better off for it.
Because as long as it gets done, you might just, again, like you said, if you worked the other way, be bogged down and never get that idea out, or never get the work done. And
the thing is, I think, all the literature always is working off a certain conception of what the problem is and what the solution space is. Mm-hmm. And the more you read the literature, the more you subconsciously adopt all of that. And if it turns out the right solution is a little bit off track, then you're more and more likely to miss it. The more you read, because the more you're going to be concentrating on the parts where people have written back and forth and so on. And so, as I say, in this case, sort of laying the blame on the standard predicate logic part, or the standard, was a non-standard thing to do. And also what helped me was that I learned that logic in a natural deduction system rather than an axiomatic system. And that turned out to be really helpful too. So I was just bringing a slightly different set of tools to the problem, and that gave me, led me off in a different direction, which turned out to be fruitful. So I think, anyway.
Very nice, very nice. I think this is really, I think this is, I appreciate and I'm in favor of this kind of way of doing things, and doing philosophy. Certainly being aware of the literature, but in order to, like you said, bring a different set of tools and not maybe go against some working off a different conception of what the problem is that's exactly what you need to do.
And often you're even unaware of it. I remember Richard Feynman somewhere wrote that he learned calculus from a particular book, he was autodidact and read this book out of the library. It just happened to have a bunch of little mathematical tricks that are not given in a standard calculus course. And he said later that often he would just be doing things different in physics because he had this slightly different mathematical toolbox he was working with. Oh. And he didn't do that intentionally, but if he had just followed the standard rote presentation, he would be working with the same tools that everybody else is, and he would have missed a lot of stuff. So
good. Yeah. Good case study. Okay. So let's chat. I'm curious just about a little bit about you have 4 books, it looks like, but just the next book, Metaphysics Within Physics. Mm-hmm. And so tell me a little bit about this, how this book came to be.
So this book came in yet a different way. This book came because originally I wrote a paper about the status of laws of nature, which is the first paper in the book. And it was more or less someone who was thinking about laws of nature the way you naturally would if you took a lot of physics courses and more or less took at face value the way people talked about laws of nature. Mm-hmm. And which does not involve giving a more fine-grained philosophical analysis of them. Yeah. And then you go look at the philosophical literature and you find these Humean analyses and this and that. And they just look kind of artificial and ad hoc and not right, to tell you the truth. Like they're giving you the wrong results.
Sure.
So I wrote this paper, which was just this idea that the laws of physics aren't the right things you should be trying to analyze. They're the sorts of things you should be taking as it were foundational or primitive and analyzing other things in terms of them. And that paper just turned out to be too long to submit anywhere. And one of the things that drives me crazy is having to take papers that I've written the way I thought they should be written and then cut stuff out just because somebody has a word limit. So I took that paper and I circulated it around, but I stuck it in a drawer. And then Barry Lower, who was one of my colleagues, wrote a response to it. And I wrote a response to his response, but since I hadn't published the first paper, I stuck that in a drawer. And I kept sort of writing this and that and sticking them in the drawer, and then I noticed the drawer was full enough to make a book out of. And so all of those things, and they were sort of thematically related papers, only one of which had been published. And so I just put them together and published them as a book. So that was that.
Very nice. And so, so what's the core idea behind Metaphysics Within Physics?
Well, look, the core idea of the title, which is what drives a lot of what I do, is just that metaphysics is ontology. That's what the field is. And of course, we get the name from Aristotle, but Aristotle didn't use that name. Mm-hmm. And if you look at what Aristotle was doing in the book we call Metaphysics, it was ontology. It was the study of being as such, of what kinds of things there are stated at the most highly generic level, which turns out to be the level of categories for him. So if ontology is about what exists, if metaphysics is about what exists, and you're interested in asking of the physical world, what's its ontology, then you better be doing some physics, because that's the subject matter which is dealing with the nature of physical items, the nature of space and time. Yep. So part of it is that any metaphysics in that area has to be informed by physics. And part of it is that to say that you're informed by physics isn't to say you go to the physics department and just ask, tell me what space and time are, because often the answers you'll get from them are awfully confused. I mean, you have to study the physical theories with this particular question in mind and be careful about it in ways that physicists are not trained to be careful. And so that's where sort of doing foundations of physics comes from.
Okay. So what's a good conception of understanding how physics informs, or how metaphysics might be informed by physics? Like, do you have maybe an example?
Sure. So think the nature of space and time. That's certainly a question that philosophers discussed from the beginning, and various views were taken. And you can think of the Leibniz-Clark correspondence, where Leibniz is fighting with Newton over the nature of space and time. In what we now call Newton being a substantivalist and Leibniz being a relationist. So this is just a very recognizable philosophical debate. What Newton brought into that debate was experiment. So Newton argued for his conception of space and time through the bucket experiment I just got a beep here that I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Well, I think something's coming in. I'll just ignore it. I'm just waiting for the beeps to end.
Sure. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, it's something else, but I'll just ignore it. Okay, done. So to go back, right, so there's Newton and Leibniz, or Newton and Clark, Clark and Leibniz, with Clark representing Newton, arguing about relationism and substantivalism. And the thing that Newton brings in that settles the issue, as far as I'm concerned, was an experiment, and a very simple experiment, an experiment that you don't even have to do because you know how it's going to come out, which is this bucket experiment. And that just kills off Descartes' conception of motion, Aristotle's conception of motion, the things that had been argued about for millennia. And you say that this appeal to experimentation and what space and time have to be like in order to explain what you see around you is a way to make progress. And that's the part that any good philosophy needs to be aware of. You need to try and understand what was the space-time structure that Newton postulated, and how did that play a role in explaining physical behavior? And then what is the space-time structure of special relativity, and how does that play? And what is the space-time structure of general relativity? And how does that play a role in explaining what you see, and so on? And those questions about the basic nature of space and time, according to Newton, according to special relativity, according to general relativity, have just been taken up and discussed in more detail by philosophers than they really have by physicists, for the most part.
Right. Okay. And so I'm curious of how, so certainly this is, I imagine, is this, how would you say this claim is received among metaphysicians?
It depends on who the metaphysician is. I think that the general idea that metaphysics, insofar as it's discussing the nature of physical reality, better attend to physics, is very widely accepted at a general level,
right,
now more than it used to be. And the people who think you can do some kind of a priori conceptual analysis are getting fewer and more far between. I think the whole thing was ruined by Kant. I mean, Kant is just the evil guy here, because Kant was the one who tried to insist that metaphysics had to be a priori and had to deal in necessary truths.
Sure. At
a time where he thought those were the same criterion. And if you think that metaphysics has to be a priori, and you know for sure that physics isn't, then you're immediately going to conclude that physics can't have anything to say to metaphysics.
Yeah.
But of course, nobody before Kant thought that metaphysics had to be a priori. Aristotle certainly didn't think that, and Descartes didn't think that, and Leibniz didn't. Why would they? You're asking questions like, what fundamentally exists? Why won't that be informed by experience? Of course it'll be informed by experience. So Kant was the one who just set the whole thing on the wrong footing, and then led to a kind of philosophy that the logical positivists and the logical empiricists rightly rejected.
Right. And
they mocked metaphysics because they thought metaphysics was what Kant did and the followers of Kant did. And so there's, just a project of reclaiming the name metaphysics for what metaphysics really always has been, which is not something that's supposed to be a priori, and therefore obviously would be informed by physical considerations.
No, this is really interesting.
If you're worried about physical ontology.
No, yeah. This is something we still hear. Well, so I think there's certainly I'm not sure. I haven't done like a poll or a survey, but individuals, maybe not in metaphysics, have this mischaracterization of a caricature of metaphysics as being, necessarily a priori, afraid of experience, distant from experience, kind of the way in which folks, And so, like meaningful discussions regarding metaphysics don't take place as often as they could, unfortunately.
Right.
I don't know if you've experienced this at all in discussing maybe with folks who aren't in doing metaphysics or. Yeah,
I don't actually even spend a lot of time talking to the. I know there are still groups who are more on this analytic side, as it were, it's analytic or it's conceptual analysis or something like that. They're not the people that I actually interact with, and so I just don't. Sometimes it's frustrating because you come across someone like that and you just think, this is silly.
Fair.
There's a perfectly good question of analyzing conceptual systems, and that's so hard I wouldn't even begin to approach it because I have no idea really how conceptual systems are organized and what concepts are and how they interact with each other. That's a really, really hard question.
Right.
And I guess you can pursue that a priori to the extent that you can do psychological experiments on yourself and try and figure out how your conceptual system is structured. But none of that's going to give you a clue about what's going on in the world, right? None of that is going to give you a clue. If your fundamental interest in metaphysics, in metaphysics is ontology and what exists, you can analyze your conceptual system to death and you won't find out anything about what exists. You may find out that you're biased in certain ways and there are certain ways of thinking that are going to be unnatural to you, and then maybe some suggestions that are going to be hard for you to comprehend at first shot. But you're just not going to get any results that are relevant. You're doing something else. And I don't want to say it's an uninteresting thing what you're doing, but it's just not what interests me and what I think I would even be very good at.
Fair enough. All right. Well, thank you for clearing that up. I appreciate that, your insights there. Well, so why don't you tell us a little bit about your new project, which it looks like to be titled the New Foundations for Physical Geometry.
Right. So this is a very huge kind of thing, and I don't even know that I'm ever going to complete it properly.
Okay.
Basically, to give you an idea, the way to start is to say, what is mathematical physics anyway? And mathematical physics is a discipline that uses mathematics and mathematical structures as representations of the physical world. And so you should think of mathematics as the language in which the physical theories are being formulated. And there are lots of different mathematical languages. There's not just one. There's lots of different pieces of mathematics or mathematical formalisms that you can bring to bear on a physical problem. And if you don't think hard and carefully about why you're picking this particular mathematical structure over another and what you're, as it were, implicitly committing yourself to, then you're likely, again, to just be blinded to a lot of stuff that's going on that was determined by your choice of language, as it were. So that's the first point. Then there's the really hard part, which is, can you actually construct new mathematical languages, new mathematical structures that are built for the aim of doing physics, not for the aim of doing pure math? That you're taking into account already what you think you know about the physical world and then asking what would be a good mathematical structure to talk about this thing. Now, what I've been trying to do is, first of all, argue that the mathematical structures that are used in physics have typically not been built for the purposes they're being put to, and are actually not very good fits, that there are things that are hard to express or seem awkward because you're using a bad mathematical formalism to express them. And then to actually build the alternatives, to say this is not just pie in the sky, but here's a different way of doing things that fits better. So that book is about replacing standard, what's called topology, with a different structure that's supposed to cover more or less the same material or the same basic concepts in a different way and give you different resources, and in particular make the role that time plays in physics much easier and more transparent to see and to express, because you're using a mathematical structure in which it's naturally expressible.
So yeah, how do you go about understanding where and how and why these mathematical structures fail to do fail to fit or do what you hope they do, and how do you create the new ones, or how do you?
Yeah, I mean, there are easier things and harder things to say here. In this particular case, for what I'm ultimately interested in, which is understanding time, it's easy to say historically the following thing, that the basic geometrical mathematics, the mathematics dealing with geometry that's used, was originally developed just for pure spatial structure, like Euclidean space, or the surface of a sphere, the curved spaces. These are spaces that have no temporal structure in them. They just don't have anything time-like in them. And then when you get the idea that we're going to think of space and time put together in a kind of four-dimensional space-time that now has both a spatial aspect and a temporal aspect, the basic mathematical tools that were used to do that were to take what had been developed for pure space and tweak it a little and try and use it for space-time.
Sure.
And it might not be surprising that that isn't the best thing to do. You're using a tool that was developed for a different purpose and trying to fit it to a new situation, and it doesn't fit that well. So that part, that there might be a problem here, is kind of easy to see.
Yeah, right.
This book didn't even come about that way, to tell you the truth. I mean, this book, again, the origin of this book was, again, very simple. I was just teaching for the nth time the basics of this stuff in a class on space-time theory, and going through different levels of geometrical structure. So you've got the metrical structure, what's called the affine structure, which determines straight lines. And sitting at the bottom of all this, at the most general level, is what's called the topological structure. And I was trying to explain topology and the basic axioms of standard topology, and I realized, as you do when you're teaching something, I didn't really understand them. I didn't get it, what was going on. The concepts, when you formally express them, just don't look like what you would expect, and they have weird properties that you don't seem right. And so there was just something off conceptually. When I tried to explain it, I realized I didn't really understand it myself. And then I thought, well, how do I think about this stuff? And it turns out I could easily see how I was thinking about these concepts, and it just wasn't using the conceptual vocabulary that was introduced in standard topology. And then I thought, well, gee, can I redo this using a language that's actually fits with the way I think about it?
Sure.
And that's what I developed in that book. I mean, that turned out to be a very extensive project. And tried to carry it out far enough to see that it was an actual, I have a well-defined mathematical structure there, and to talk about how it's different from the standard mathematical structure, and then eventually to see how to use it to do this, which is what the end of that project will be if I ever get to it. Because it turns out that the more I've thought about it, I now, even just in the last few months, have an entirely new piece of mathematics I want to develop. Yeah. So this happens over and over again, once you get in a certain frame of mind. And it's a frame of mind you're just not normally in, right? When you first learn physics, you're just told, here, use this mathematics to do these physics problems. And it's not discussed why you're using that piece of mathematics and what it means and how it connects to the physics. So it's just not a question that you're you're used to asking. But once you start asking it, it's all over the place.
Sounds good. And so I didn't realize that this book came out in 2014. However, sounds like there's going to be some new work, and even after the book has come out, you still feel not quite done, or where there will ever be. Yeah.
There was supposed to be a second volume, which has a title, and there was a chunk of it that's written, but I only have just realized that there's this entirely new part to it, which is different than even what I did in the first book, that I need to develop to make some further progress on this. So, this is a long-term project, as it turns out. And I also have another book, which you haven't mentioned, which started out as one book and became two books, and I've had to do now the second part of that book, which is what I'm finishing up right now.
Is this the, the philosophy? Oh, yeah, Philosophy of Physics, Volume 1, Space and Time.
Right, that one. So I have to do, what I'm actually finishing up now is Volume 2, which is Quantum Theory.
Oh, great. And so this is the book. Sorry, I did not mention this earlier. Introduces non-physicists to core philosophical issues surrounding the nature and structure of space-time.
Right.
So what kind of work will involve in the second volume for this book?
Well, the second volume is supposed to do for quantum theory what this one does basically for space-time theory. But it's an entirely different project because, to put it bluntly, what you're trying to get to in the end in the first book is to understand general relativity. And general relativity is a very, very intrinsically clear, precise theory. The more you work with it, the more you understand it. And there just is no such thing as quantum theory. There's a kind of mathematical formalism with rules, some of which are just rules of thumb about how to use it to make predictions. But there is no theory there. If you mean by a physical theory what I mean by a physical theory, namely something that gives you an ontology, right, and answers the question, what is there? And a dynamics which answers the question, what does it do? That is, how does it behave? So basically you have a clear statement of what exists and a clear statement of dynamical laws that govern its behavior. There is no such thing as quantum theory. There's a mathematical formalism and no agreement whatever on any side about what it's telling you about the world and how to interpret it. How what people call interpreting quantum theory is really constructing well-defined physical theories that make the same predictions that you get out of this predictive mechanism.
Is this a very different project? Is this a common view of quantum theory, or is this the more how it ought to be understood, or is this more of a nuanced?
Look, is it common? I don't really know of anybody who would dispute what I just said.
Okay.
Although most people wouldn't put it that way, because this language of saying, oh, there's this project of, quote, interpreting quantum theory. I mean, if you ask, what does that even mean?
Sure.
To interpret quantum theory, I don't see that at the end of the day you could end up saying anything different than what I just said. It's just that when you say you're interpreting quantum theory, it suggests you have this thing that's a theory. It's a physical theory, namely quantum theory, and then there's this extra thing to do with it, namely interpreting it. And then the physicists can say, oh, let the philosophers do that. That's not what I do as a physicist. Part of my point is that, no, this is what you do as a physicist. If you're a physicist who actually cares about the nature of the physical world and not just making predictions, if you're a pure operationalist or if you're an engineer and you just want to get the right numbers out, and you say, I don't care about what this is telling me about the physical world, okay, then you're just an operationist, you're just an engineer.
Sure. To
my mind, you're not really a physicist. I mean, the main motivation of physics is curiosity about the nature of the physical world. And it's very frustrating to physics students because, whenever you teach a class in philosophy of physics, you get some physics students and they come away and they say, you're asking the questions I was interested in that got me to go to take physics. Mm-hmm. And frustratingly, you don't ask these. You're not only are they not brought up in physics classes, they are positively punished if you bring them up. Right? This is the shut up and calculate, mentality that really says, not only will I not answer your questions, I will criticize you for asking them. And these are questions about what is the nature of the physical world. And so, part of it is to say, even though philosophers seem to be the people who are taking up the slack here, this really ought to be what physicists are doing. Yeah. But it's hard for them to admit that because it's kind of embarrassing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, do you know some? There are some physicists that address these issues.
Absolutely, there are a few, and the best philosophers of physics in the 20th century were physicists. Right, the best philosopher of physics in the first half of the 20th century was Einstein, and the best philosopher of physics in the second half was John Stuart Bell, hands down, no competition. And I don't want to say that there aren't physicists, but the number is very few. Yep. And the appreciation for what they did is even less. Einstein was more or less branded as a crank, and everything he did for 30 years was dismissed as some old guy who couldn't get with quantum mechanics, right? Who just couldn't accept it, when he was making perfectly cogent and clear criticisms of the way quantum mechanics was presented, and said he just, given the way the theory is presented, he couldn't believe it, and you saw why, and he never got good answers. And they did that to Einstein, right?
I know. He's like,
if you were some little peon physicist, okay, they might dismiss you, but they managed to do that even to Einstein, which is really quite remarkable. So yeah, there are some physicists, but it is honestly, positively discouraged for physicists to do this. David Merman was interested in this. He was a physicist, and he would have graduate students, people, trying to go to graduate school, said, I'd like to come to work with you on foundations. Right. And he would say, look, I'll work with you, but first of all, I don't do this as my real day job, right? Because it's not considered real physics. And second of all, you can't write a dissertation on this because it won't be accepted. You just can't do a physics dissertation on foundations of physics. This is what happened to David Albert and why he trained as a theoretical physicist. Right. He wanted to work on foundations, and the dean called him in and said, no, we will not allow you to write your dissertation on foundations. You have to do calculate scattering cross sections in 5-4 theory, which he did because they wouldn't let him do anything else. And then, he transferred from a physics department where he got his first job to a philosophy department where asking these foundational issues was appreciated rather than dismissed.
That's right. I didn't realize that. I didn't realize David Albert began in physics, but I have.
Yeah. He got his degree from Rockefeller University in theoretical physics.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. And I've seen him. He's done some media appearances and whatnot. And okay, well, this is really interesting. I've always been interested too in some of these disciplinary, issues related to, and then and also just values in terms of like what constitutes good work. And interesting to know some of the divisions between philosophers of physics and theoretical physicists. So even if you were going into theoretical physics, it's still not considered, like, working on foundational problems isn't particularly
right.
Yeah.
It's not something that's considered actually doing physics. There are all kinds of stories. I guess Murray Gell-Mann tells a story where he had a colleague who had a graduate student who was very, very promising, really bright, and he hadn't seen the colleague for some years. And he asked him when he saw him, well, what happened to so-and-so, right, this real up-and-coming guy? And he says the other person shook his head and said, he got lost, he got ruined, he tried to understand quantum mechanics. And this is what they say. If you start asking questions when you learn quantum mechanics, like, what is this telling me about the physical world? You'll realize, first of all, that there are no good answers that you're going to find in any of your books.
Sure.
And then you're going to say, this is something people ought to be looking into, and then you'll end up not doing, what's considered acceptable physics. I mean, it's gotten a little bit better in the last 30 years, but it's still a terrible situation, and it will remain a terrible situation because it's baked into the thing sociologically at this point, and it's very hard to unbake it.
Well, I guess this might kind of lead into my final question I had for you, and then I'll open it up if there's anything you want to discuss further. I was going to ask, what's some of the greatest challenge to philosophers of science, and I should say, maybe more particularly in your case, philosophers of physics today?
What are the greatest challenges right now? To my mind, and this is a conclusion I've come to only fairly recently. Think of this as my personal challenge.
Okay.
Is that philosophers of physics are simply tremendously more knowledgeable about foundational issues than physicists are. And physics would benefit from understanding what philosophers of physics understand. And this, it sounds wrong. It sounds like, shouldn't the philosophers of physics always be deferring to the physicists?
Sure.
And the answer is, on foundational issues, absolutely not. And the challenge is to actually start to have that influence. The challenge is to take the conversation that philosophers of physics have among themselves, and bring it to actual practicing physicists, so at least the basics that we've figured out become appreciated and become well known. I think this is a very useful thing that philosophers ought to be doing, but it's very hard because you have all these disciplinary boundaries and you have all of this, policing of boundaries and so on.
Wow. Yeah.
So I think that's, to me, the present challenge more than anything else is to do that. The challenge, if you're doing first order new work in foundations of physics, is, as usual, to find a good topic and one you can make progress on, because it's not that hard to find problems, but it's hard to find problems that are tractable or that you can do something new and push it forward.
Very good. Very good. Well, I hope these connections can be further fostered. Is this something that you yourself are going about, working with physicists or reaching? I'm going about annoying physicists. Yes.
I've had a Facebook debate that's still going on. That's been going on for 4 months with a Nobel Prize winning physicist. So
fun!
And that's gotten some attention. So I'm hoping that cracks the door open a little bit. And this is really just cracking the door open between foundations of physics, whether it's done by philosophers or mathematicians or physicists,
sure,
to regular physicists who just haven't thought about foundational issues and don't really understand them. So I feel like it's not something I had before this tried to do intentionally, and now I'm more and more thinking, it should be done intentionally. There should be really an effort to bring the conversation that people working in foundations, things that everybody working in foundations take for granted, because you learn it, the first thing you learn are these things, but they're not things that regular physicists ever even are exposed to. And just to get them to realize there's this body of information that's there. It's a little bit shocking. Even whenever when I teach a graduate course on foundations on quantum theory, and I give an exam at the end, one of the sections is always you versus the Nobel Prize winner. And I have, actual quotations from 3 different Nobel Prize winners. And the thing is now to say what's wrong with what they just said and correct it. And you can do it. And, at some level, you shouldn't be able to do that, right? A philosophy graduate student who's basically just coming to the field and has had a semester, you think it doesn't make any sense that they could actually have a clearer understanding of the foundations of physics than a Nobel Prize winning physicist does. But that's just a fact.
Wow.
That's just the way it is.
That's a really cool assignment. That's Yeah. So each one of these quotes has some error in foundational issues. Yeah, that's great.
Absolutely.
Oh wow.
Absolutely.
And
there are more than that. I mean, people who you just wouldn't expect to make mistakes are making mistakes that you wouldn't make if you had a clear understanding of the conceptual foundations. You can be a wonderful person at calculating things and working through the equations and getting numbers and not really appreciate what it all means physically. And if you then, the problem is physicists spend so much time learning how to solve the equations. So if you're a philosopher, you don't spend any time learning how to solve the equations. You spend time thinking about what the equations mean. And it's just a different project.
So but then physicists are not asking the question, what do the equations mean too often?
Correct. Yeah. They're not only not asking it, as I say, if you're a regular person, you are positively discouraged from asking it. It's not just benign neglect. And then when you get old, and this is why I'm dealing with this Nobel Prize winner, because he sort of got old enough to ask questions like, well, what is going on in quantum mechanics anyway?
Sure. He's willing to engage.
I mean, I could tell you story after story like this, but I've taken up too much.
No, this is great, Tim. I really appreciate this. I mean, this is fascinating. I'll be sure to now follow along, hopefully the Facebook debate, as well as just, other issues in foundations.
It's unbelievably long at this point. I mean, one of my projects is actually to take that thing and turn it into a book and, trim it down and carve out the important parts and put it all in context. But it's, I started with one post on my Facebook and I'm now up to the 7th post where everything is filled with comments and I have to do the 8th one. So it's tremendously long, and because people are chiming in, all sorts of different people are chiming in, it's very hard to follow linearly and so on, unfortunately.
Well, we're looking for then at least the publication of that or the editorial or whatnot.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention or to plug, discuss, either like a new book or a graduate program or anything else you'd like to mention?
Yes, I want to mention one thing, because this has just coincidentally arisen in the last couple of weeks. So I just want to mention it.
Absolutely.
Which is that there is a paper I wrote many, many years ago that got published and seems to have fallen off the radar screen, if it was ever on anybody's radar screen. But recently people have been reading it who are unaware of it and keep saying, why doesn't everybody know about this paper? So I just want to mention it for anybody interested in the mind-body problem, which is, again, something we haven't talked about at all.
No.
This paper, that's 1989 paper in Journal of Philosophy called Computation and Consciousness, because it's a paper that refutes the computational theory of consciousness, and I think refutes is an accurate statement. And when I say this to people, they look at me funny, like, what do you mean?
Right.
But then when they read the paper, they say, yeah, it does. So, for whatever reason, it never got centralized or brought into a lot of the literature on consciousness. It's not my main field that I work in. Again, I'm sort of kind of an outsider.
Sure.
But yeah, I anybody with that interest, you might be interested in looking at that paper.
Yeah, it looks like it's been cited recently in a little bit since 2014. Yeah, that's definitely picking up some steam. So, all right. Well, I'll definitely check it out. I'm definitely have some interest in that. So, computation and consciousness. All right, Tim. Well, it's been a pleasure getting to chat with you, getting to hear about your work and hearing some of these great stories. And I really appreciate the time.
Sure.
Yeah. So take care. Enjoy the rest of your time. I imagine the teaching load starts at NYU pretty soon.
I have a few weeks. It's there's a January J term where they do these compressed classes, so the regular classes don't start for another few weeks.
Okay.
So it's not breathing down my neck yet.
Fantastic. All right. Well, again, enjoy the rest of your time off, or at least preparatory work before the official semester begins. And I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.